This recording of The Trees, written by Nicholas Royle, appears here with permission from the author, all rights reserved. It is available in the collection The Dummy and Other Uncanny Stories, published by Swan River Press, 2018. See the accompanying description for a website link. Reading by Jeff Clark. The Trees, by Nicholas Royle. I was pleased with the way it had gone, introducing Jane to my parents, though I wasn't sure for whose benefit we'd done it. Probably Jane's first, then theirs and mine last. I wanted them to meet her all right, no question about that, but I'd sensed how impatient they were with the fact that I was nearing 30 and still single, and I didn't want the symbolism of the meeting to get too heavy. Jane and I had only been together a few months. Still, I felt okay about the direction in which we seemed to be heading. So we drove the 90 miles to the coast in Jane's clapped-out old Austin Maxi. My parents had moved to a permanently damp port on the east side of the country. About the only thing that remained dry there was my dad's sense of humor. "Have you still not got a job, then?" he asked me once the introductions were over. I worked full-time as a draftsman, but in a freelance capacity for a number of different companies, and my dad, now that he was retired, worried full-time on my behalf. When I was younger, I'd always thought that by the age of 30 I'd be an adult, in charge of all my own affairs, with no one around to approve or disapprove. But I guess your parents are always your parents, whatever age you are, and in one sense at least you remain a child as long as they're alive. Jane had been a little nervous, but the whole thing went off perfectly well. They seemed to take a genuine liking to her, and the three of them chatted easily while I withdrew from the room on the pretext of visiting the toilet. I hadn't told Jane they'd also met my last two girlfriends and liked them, because she would probably have felt under even more pressure. "I'm getting a bit tired of meeting your girlfriends and getting to know them," Mum had said to me, quite reasonably. "And then you finish with them." I went upstairs and had a quick look in the bathroom and my parents' bedroom. It's just something I do whenever I go to see family or friends. I always have a bit of a look round. I spotted a couple of pictures on the dresser that hadn't been there last time I had. One showed the whole family squinting into the sun on a walking holiday in the lakes. The other, my dad on top of a mountain somewhere in Wales. I held the first photograph up to my eye and studied Mum's and Dad's faces I'd known for 30 years, but these days I only saw them every 8 weeks or so, if that. When they'd opened the door to us that night, I'd registered instantly that my dad's hair had more gray in it, and my Mum's, behind that lifelong familiarity, was clearly getting older as well. But it's like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Having noticed that 2-month change, suddenly I saw them as Mum and Dad again, same as they always were. After all, the age difference between us would never change. I looked at the photograph, remembering the holiday as clearly as if it were yesterday, the curdling mix of butter and cucumber and the quick pain of scratching a sunburnt arm, but also the excitement of spotting lizards before they darted between the cracks in stone walls, the satisfaction of building a dam of stones across the gill. The memories were luxurious, but they hurt at the same time, the heart full of hope and the mind so aware of the inevitability of passing time. I didn't want my parents to get any older. I didn't know how I'd cope. I couldn't even think about it. I took a right turn off the main road and rolled the Maxi down to a little crossroads. "Which way is it?" Jane asked, leaning forward to peer through the windscreen at the faded wooden signs. It was about 10 in the evening now, middle of February, and it had already been going dark when we'd arrived at my parents' at around 5:30. After dinner, my Mum had cooked my favorites, meat and potato pie with red cabbage, followed by lemon meringue pie. I'd suggested a drive up the coast to have a look round what remained of the village of Speedwell. "I've got these pots to do," my Mum had said. "I'll do them," I told her. "No, I'll do them and your dad'll dry. I always do them. You know that." I did, and it was true. She never let anyone do the dishes. Sometimes, as a boy, I'd wash my own supper pots, a coffee mug and a side plate, but that was all. She said no one else could wash them without breaking things, and, as far as I could remember, she'd never actually broken anything herself. "You two go," Mom said, and I realized she was giving us the opportunity to have some time together. So we drove up the main road 30 miles or so to the Speedwell turnoff. Jane sat in the passenger seat. She liked having me drive even though it was her car. My old thing was currently the center of attention at Eric's escort agency, a garage I'd considered moving flat to be closer to, and we chatted about this and that. She fiddled with the digital dial on the radio, a new acquisition after Jane's last job painting stage scenery in Croydon, and she managed to lose all the wavelengths I'd programmed in for her. "Sorry," she said with a little smile when button 2 produced a tangle of Dutch instead of radio 4. "It's your radio," I said, going left at the crossroads. "Yes, but you'll have to program it again." True, and I didn't mind, but we fell silent for a few minutes. We were at a stage in our relationship where we could almost take such silences for granted and not notice them, but I, at least, was still slightly conscious of the gaps. "Are those what your dad gave you?" she asked, looking at my shoes. Before dinner, my dad had dug out some of his unused work boots, those with steel toe caps. He didn't need them anymore, he'd said, and we both wore the same size. The boots rubbed slightly, but I liked their sturdy, heavy feel on my feet. "Thanks a lot," I'd said as he got down on his hands and knees looking for more unwanted stuff in his wardrobe. "You've still got that old thing," I said, spotting one of his Michael Caine sports jackets. "You can have that as well if you want," he offered, emerging with another pair of shoes. Why was he giving me all this stuff? Did he think he wasn't going to live much longer? It struck me that however much he worried about it, and he had a list of imaginary ailments as long as my arm, he was in fact fit and well and could easily be around for another 30-odd years. In other words, until I was as old as he was now. Then I thought of Mum downstairs preparing the dinner with her hands caught in the slow grip of arthritis. I knew she fretted about the possibility of it getting worse. She was always active, never let her hands rest, as if she feared they might seize up in an idle moment. I took the boots but put the jacket back. "Yes," I said to Jane, "they're good, aren't they?" "Very nice." We passed a sign warning of deer, a stag with antlers in a red triangle, and I drove on toward Speedwell. I'd visited the village once before, but in daylight. Most of the village was supposed to have fallen into the sea at some point in the distant past, and there was talk of being able to hear its former inhabitants moaning in the wind when the tide was low. I had a particular reason, which I hadn't mentioned to Jane, for wanting to see the place again and at night. A colleague at one of the firms where I'd been working had mentioned the village, and I'd asked him what he knew about the place. "I'll tell you later," he said, gesturing at his drawing board. So I caught up with him later the same day in the office kitchen. People came in and out to make mugs of disgusting lukewarm instant coffee and, like Clive, to light up because the office was non-smoking. He was a man of curious contrasts, a well-groomed, just-so sort of man with an eye-catching green Zeiss coating on the lenses of his glasses, and yet he was never without a pack of 20 B&H in his top pocket. I mean, if he were going to smoke at all, you would have expected Gauloise or Gitane, or Capstan full strength for that matter, but he chose common-as-muck Benson's. He offered me the pack. That was the other thing about Clive, the most forgetful man I'd ever met. I shook my head. He just closed the lid and replaced the pack in his shirt pocket. Apart from having a head like a sieve, he was one of the most down-to-earth people I knew, which meant that his story made all the more of an impression on me. "I went there with Helen," he said, leaning back against the sink. "I was driving. It was late. I don't know what time, but it was quite dark. I don't know if you know, but there's only 2 roads to Speedwell, both going off the main road." I nodded. "We just wanted to have a look at the village because we'd heard about it, but we never actually got to see it." He inhaled and plucked the cigarette from between his lips with forefinger and thumb. "We were driving down this little road and there were trees either side in regular lines. I had the full beam on because there were no other cars, and gradually the trees started to arc overhead, over the road. Within about 50 yards they'd formed a tight canopy above the road, and the effect of my lights, I don't know, something, made me feel frightened." He sucked on his cigarette again, producing a hissing sound as the air was pulled through it. "Suddenly I became really frightened and I couldn't explain it at all. There was just the canopy of trees and the way the headlights were caught. I looked at Helen. We didn't speak, didn't say a word, either of us, and I stopped the car, turned around and drove back to the main road." He sipped his coffee, then put it down on the sink and folded his arms. "The strangest thing was we didn't say a word and yet we both felt it. Helen told me later she felt it as well." The fields stretched out on either side of the road, but we couldn't see more than a few yards because it was so dark. You could just make out furrowed soil and the occasional shock of hedgerow. There was a blustery wind which buffeted the car and made us feel quite isolated, as if it was part of the land and we weren't, and it was trying to blow us back to wherever we belonged. I'd seen those M.R. James adaptations on television when I was a kid and been affected by them. He'd written about this part of the world and made it frightening. Or more likely, it seemed to me, looking out onto the grim fields, he just picked up on what was here already. If any part of the country looked as if it might spawn little demons and evil creatures to scamper across the road, a blur in the headlights, this was surely it. Then the trees started appearing. I glanced at Jane. Her seat was pushed back, meaning I had to turn to see her. She was playing with the radio with her toes. She must have hit 2 buttons at the same time, a station and the volume control, because suddenly a din erupted in the back of the car. It sounded like grunge played backwards or punk at the wrong speed. Anyway, it made me wince, and Jane found the off switch with her hand, looking at me sheepishly. "Radio 4 again," she said, drawing her knees up under her chin. For some strange reason of her own, she never wore a safety belt. I'd tried to convince her it was a good idea, but she had a face she pulled for times like that, whenever I tried to tell her what to do, and it never failed to put me in my place. More trees sprang up along the side of the narrow road, my headlights picking out their trunks from the darkness like skittles. I slowed down slightly and wondered if I was going to feel anything or if Clive's story would prove to be no more than just that. Within seconds, the trees formed unbroken lines on both sides of the road, and the light from the car caught both walls of foliage as if they were of far solider stuff. A brief chill tickled the back of my neck, and I realized with a guilty flush of excitement that I was picking up something of Clive's inexplicable terror. The trees arched overhead, branches interweaving. The trapped light made it seem like we were in a tunnel. Now I did feel frightened. I shivered involuntarily and felt my arm prickle with goose pimples, but I kept my foot on the accelerator. This would have been the moment when Clive had turned round. I sneaked a quick look at Jane. She was white, eyes like drops of ink on a sheet of blotting paper, her mouth hanging open. My hands tightened on the wheel to compensate for my arms, which had gone slack. Something penetrated my stomach with its cold fist and then opened its fingers like someone waking up. My whole body trembled, spidery sweat crawling out from my hairline. Still, the tunnel unrolled before the car, uninterrupted, and I felt my slick palms begin to slip on the wheel. Suddenly the wall broke, the trees fell away, and the light escaped into the night once more. A house came up on the left, and a choice of two even narrower roads. I took the beach road and seconds later ground the car to a halt in the gravel of the car park. We sat there without speaking. Jane turned and looked at me, but I couldn't face her. I knew I'd had no right to do that with her in the car unwarned about what to expect. I didn't know what to say to her. Then I heard her door open and shut and watched her walk in front of the car down towards the beach, her arms wrapped around her body for protection against the bitter wind. I sighed. How stupid I'd been. It had certainly been frightening, though. Clive had been right, but more frightening than I'd bargained for, and the adventure now seemed pretty silly. I got out of the car and followed the path Jane had taken to the beach. At first I couldn't see where she'd got to. Then I saw her standing a few yards from the incoming waves, staring out to sea, her beautiful long brown hair blowing in the wind like a scarf. I scrunched through the pebbles to get to her and came alongside a few feet from where she stood. She didn't turn, but after a few moments she did speak. "It's quite scary down here as well, isn't it? I mean, a beach at night. It's not somewhere you tend to go after dark." I nodded and made a kind of non-committal murmur. There were no ship's lights and you couldn't make out the horizon, so even though you thought you knew where it would be, there was a wedge of impenetrable darkness instead between the sea and the star-flecked sky. "Where are the remains of the village supposed to be then?" Jane asked. I found her neutral tone disturbing. "Straight out from here," I said, trying to sound interested because she'd asked the question rather than because I cared about the legend. "You almost expect to see a church steeple sticking up through the waves," she said quietly. The cold bit through my thick woolen coat. "I'm going back to the car," I said. "Are you coming?" "In a minute." I trudged back over the pebbles. There were some anglers 100 yards away, storm lamps glowing behind their big green umbrellas. I could see them standing in a huddle to one side, and part of me envied their camaraderie. I imagined a catch was unlikely on a night like this, but that the fish were less important to them than just being there together. I got in the car and started the engine to warm it up before Jane reappeared. The interior light was not working, and I peered at the road map by the feeble light of the car park's single lamp to check our way back. I heard footsteps and Jane's door being opened, so I stuffed the map in the door pocket and turned to watch her get in. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Let's go," she said. She looked straight ahead and said nothing else. I turned the car around and we rolled out of the car park, past the Stag Inn, where there were lights burning. I thought about asking Jane if she fancied a drink, but it didn't seem like a good idea in the current climate, decidedly chilly. I flicked the stalk to cast more light on the road ahead. The little blue light that came on to indicate the full beam was some comfort. Whatever car I was driving, the blue light always reminded me of the old Jaguar my dad had driven us around in when I was a child. On long journeys at night, I'd occasionally stir and peer over the front seats at the dashboard. It intrigued me to see the blue light go on and off as other cars emerged out of the darkness, then passed us and disappeared again. I asked my dad what the blue light meant, but because I was too small to understand how you could possibly alter the headlamps by switching a blue light on and off, the little blue spot assumed magical qualities. My dad used it to get us safely home. My mum was in on it too. I used to poke my head round her seat next to the door, and she'd say, "Hello, sunshine," and smile at me. Then I'd curl up and go back to sleep. There was no one in the back now, but in a sense there was no need because the child was still inside me. The blue light meant the same to me now as it had then. My skin went cold at the idea of it going out for good. Jane's voice made me jump. Why did you want to come here?" "What do you mean?" I said. "Look, what's wrong, Jane? What have I done?" "I asked you a question. Why did you want to come here?" Her voice was as cold as the air inside the car had become. "I wanted to introduce you to my parents. You did keep asking me if I would, after all." "I mean here," she snapped. "Speedwell." I thought about telling her the truth. We were coming up to where the road was bound on both sides by the trees. In 2 seconds, we'd be in that tunnel of pale light again. "Someone at work was going on about it," I said as the trees sprang to attention on either side of us, their thin lower branches whipping about in the wind. Jane's voice rose. "Saying what about it?" "Saying I should go there." "You'd already been there." It sounded like it'd be worth coming back. We kept the truth in the air between us, batting it to and fro, neither of us daring to catch it, and the temperature in the car dropped through the floor. The light was pressed back at us by the trees, on both sides and overhead. I was shaking. Jane's voice trembled as she pressed me for more. "What did this someone say about it?" "That it was frightening. They turned back." There, I'd said it. "We didn't, though, did we? And you didn't tell me. I let you drive because I thought I could trust you." She stopped as the trees receded behind the car. Without realizing it, I'd been putting my foot down and we were hurtling towards the crossroads. The car flew across, so now I'd missed the right turn back to the main road, and rather than stop and turn round, it seemed easier to carry on through the other little villages and catch up with the main road further south. "I'm sorry, Jane," I said, then glanced at her. She was staring straight ahead, her mouth a pencil stroke. It scared me to see her like that. I dreaded confrontation, so I faced the front and just drove. At the next crossroads I went straight on, then had to choose at the next junction between the road ahead, which looked more like a track, or a left turn, which seemed to take us away from the direction we wanted to go in, but was at least a proper road. 200 yards later at another junction I had to concede we were lost. I took the map from the pocket and held it up to my face, but I couldn't see anything by the light of the dash. With the interior light not working, and there not being any torch as far as I knew, and I didn't want to risk further confrontation by asking Jane, the only thing for it was to take the map outside and read it by the light of the headlamps. I muttered something to the effect of what I was doing and opened my door. The wind grabbed the door from my hand and then caught me by the hair. There was a row of trees next to the road being tugged this way and that. Somewhere beyond them I could hear the distant thrumming of hooves on packed earth. I went to the front of the car and bent down over the map. I felt so stupid to have treated Jane the way I had. She deserved better than that. It wasn't altogether clear from the map because it was small scale and couldn't show all the tiny little roads, but it seemed as if a right turn might be the best option from where we were. I stood up and, deliberately not looking at Jane through the windscreen, walked back to the driver's door. I noticed I'd left it open and again felt stupid for having let her get cold. But when I got into my seat and closed the door, it seemed a lot warmer than it had been. Without turning to look at Jane, I released the clutch and spun the wheel to the right. The road looked similar to the one that led into Speedwell, though we couldn't possibly have described a complete circle. A line of trees approached on the right, bent almost double by the wind. There was a strange smell in the car which I presumed I'd brought in from the outside, and I was so angry with myself and worked up I was getting hotter by the second. We tore along the road, which was now lined both sides by trees. The blue full-beam light flicked on and off as the car hit bumps in the road, and when I tried to stalk to see what was wrong, it flapped loosely in my hand. It was becoming unbearably hot in the car, and I couldn't stand the silent treatment any longer. I glanced at Jane out of the corner of my eye, saw just a flash of red, and turned my head to get a proper look. I screamed and the wheel jerked out of my hands. The car skidded and thumped into the grass verge. Jane's throat had been opened and there was blood down the front of her clothes. I felt the heat coming off her, and the smell had got much worse, like the stench of an animal. My stomach turned itself inside out, my body convulsing. I felt something hot on the back of my neck and raised my eyes a fraction to see in the rearview mirror. It was dark back there, but I could just make out a mask of barely human features, and above it, silhouetted against the back window through which the trees stood waving in the wind, the twist and curve of antlers.